reflect the view of the government, and he was looking forward to working with the president-elect. Pennsylvania Senate race hasn't been called, and the candidates may end close enough that a recount will be triggered. Here's Fox's Brian Yennis.
Currently, it is in recount territory, but there are still votes out there to be counted. The Pennsylvania Senate race is still too close to call, but the Republican challenger, Dave McCormick, is ahead of Democratic Senator Bob Casey by about 30,000 votes, or less than 0.5%. And in Pennsylvania, according to law, if the margin is 0.5% or less, there is an automatic recount. Now, the McCormick campaign is confident they have won this thing because they say they expect to win about 75% of the remaining ballots or so that are being hand processed in red Cambria County. Right now, McCormick is up with 61% of the vote.
Senator Casey's campaign says they're still in the race and that there could be enough ballots from Democrat strongholds for them to pull off a win. The Federal Reserve is to announce its decision on interest rates. Here's Fox's Hillary Barsky.
The central bank is expected to slash its benchmark interest rate by 0.25 percentage point as inflation continues to make progress toward their 2% goal. The bigger question remains how many more cuts will be needed to preserve a strong job market without reversing recent declines in inflation. Fed officials began lowering rates at their previous meeting in September by making a larger half-point rate cut. This time around, the decision on interest rates won't have the suspense like September, which left markets guessing over the size of the first rate cut in 4 years.
Hurricane Rafael is in the Gulf of Mexico and is to turn toward the west today, and the general motion should continue through the weekend, according to the National Hurricane Center. On the forecast track, the storm is expected to move over the southern Gulf of Mexico for the next few days. Fox Weather Hurricane Specialist Brian Norcross.
The conditions down here in the southern Gulf of Mexico are marginally conducive to maintaining a tropical storm, but very marginally. In the northern Gulf, if the storm were to take a path like the GFS model can indicate and turn north instead of going this way where the Hurricane Center is forecasting, up here they're totally hostile to any kind of development. So there's no threat of a significant storm here around the Gulf Coast, even though you see some lines possibly going that way.
The Atlantic hurricane season ends November 30th. A rare U.S. dime missing its mint mark was auctioned for a little over $506,000, nearly 30 times the amount it sold for 46 years earlier, according to UPI. Great Collections, which handled the auction of the 1975 No S proof dime, said the coin was purchased by an Ohio collector and his mother for $18,200 in 1978, and it remained with the family for nearly 50 years. That's all our time for now. Find more news at afn.net. I'm Robert Thornton.
Hi, it's Sandy Rios, your old friend from the morning show. So many crucial and frightening events are unfolding before our eyes. I'd like to invite you to come over to the podcast, Sandy Rios 24/7, so that we can work our way through these difficult times together. AFR.net, any podcast platform, or at sandyrios.com. And one more thing, my book, God's Velvet Hammer, is now available on Audible. So come join us at Sandy Rios 24/7, and remember, God's Velvet Hammer, available at Audible.
Hello, and welcome to the Dr. Nurse Mama Show, prescribing hope for healthy families here on American Family Radio. Here's your host, Professor, Pediatric Nurse Practitioner, and Mom of 4, Dr. Jessica Peck.
Well, hey there, friends, and welcome to my favorite part of the afternoon, getting to spend time with you, prescribing hope for healthy families. And we are moving through November, and we have Veterans Day that is coming up. And it is always a good time to thank our veterans for the service that they provide to our country, for everything that they do, the sacrifices that they make, and not only the veterans, but their families. Their families serve too. And I see children all the time who are in military-connected families. Almost every veteran I meet who is married will tell me, my spouse is what makes this whole thing work. They hold down the home front while I do what I need to do. They have such courage in the face of uncertainty, in the face of fear, in the face of rapid change. The kids are so resilient. They often have to change schools. They have to change everything. They change churches, change healthcare providers, change everything that is certain to them. And they do it so resiliently. It really is a great time to make sure that we are thanking not only veterans for their service, but their families who serve with them too. And so today I have a guest we've had on before, Tim McKnight. He wrote the book, Engaging Generation Z, Raising the Bar for Youth Ministry, which we have talked about extensively. But if you'll remember, he is also a veteran. And so we wanted to talk to him today about what that looks like and to learn a little bit more about what veterans face and how we can support them. Now, Tim is the founder and president of McKnight Ministries. It's a nonprofit parent of Engage Every Generation. He is an associate professor of missions and youth ministry and director of the Great Commission Center at Anderson University's Clamp Divinity School. He also serves as lead pastor and planter of a new church plant called Mosaic Church of Anderson. He is a busy guy, y'all. He started ministry in 1991. He served churches in Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky, Alabama, North Carolina, South Carolina. We know we have lots of listeners out in that neck of the woods. And he would want you to know that he is husband to Angela and father to Micah, Noah, Carissa, and Mariana. And he's a follower of Jesus Christ. He is an Army chaplain in the Kentucky Army National Guard and deployed on Operation Noble Eagle and Operation Enduring Freedom. And he is a recipient of the Kentucky Army National Guard Distinguished Service Medal. And we are so blessed to have you here today, Tim. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Jessica. It's great to be on the show.
Well, you know, through our nation's history, there have been men and women who have sacrificed to protect our freedom. I think about my husband's grandfather, who was a veteran in the Pacific Theater in World War II. So was his grandmother. And, you know, I think about all of the veterans in my family, my community. And each year we honor fallen veterans on Memorial Day, celebrate all of the branches of the military on Armed Forces Day, and we honor all who have served on Veterans Day, which is November 11th. So tell us a little bit about your personal experience in being a veteran in your service, Tim.
Sure. I come from a family that is service related. My father spent 32 years active duty in the United States Army and is a Vietnam veteran within those 32 years and a Cold War veteran. But he retired in 1993 and was the Command Sergeant Major of the Intelligence Security Command from 1987 to 1993. So he had a distinguished career in the military. I did not have an intention of joining the Army when I was in seminary, but I saw that there was a need for chaplains, and so I joined the chaplaincy, went through chaplain school, joined the Kentucky Army National Guard, and in that time period that I was in the Guard, right after they hit the towers in 2001, we were deployed on Operation Noble Eagle, the Homeland Defense mission, and then our orders changed. 2002 of January, we went on Operation Enduring Freedom and had a force protection mission in Europe covering 3 countries and trying to protect Americans there. And so that's really where I became a veteran, was on that deployment, because a veteran is someone who's had 180 consecutive days of active duty. And within that, you have combat veterans who served in a combat area and non-combat veterans. And so for my unit, even though we were on Enduring Freedom orders, because we were in Europe, it was a non-combat area. Even though we had a threat with Al-Qaeda, we were definitely in a non-combat area. And so I would be a non-combat veteran. My father is a combat veteran. So that's just a little background on veterans and how that works.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with us, Tim. I don't feel like that's common knowledge among non-veteran populations. And please just allow me, on behalf of our listening audience, to thank you so much for your service and for everything that you did to keep us safe, whether combat or non-combat. Combat is always an option. And in a world that we live in that just seems like it can erupt in chaos at any moment, it is scary. And I think about the history of Veterans Day. Let's just start a little bit with that because our listeners may not know that it actually started in November of 1919. And President Wilson proclaimed November 11th at that time as the first commemoration of Armistice Day with the following words. Let me read these words of President Wilson. To us in America, the reflections of Armistice Day will be filled with solemn pride in the heroism of those who died in the country's service and with gratitude for the victory, both because of the thing from which it has freed us and because of the opportunity it has given America to show her sympathy with peace and justice in the councils of the nations. So we've been celebrating Veterans Day now for actually over 100 years. What do you see as the importance? What does it mean to you as a veteran to celebrate Veterans Day?
Well, I think what you just did when you thanked me, I will just let you know that veterans are very bashful when people thank them. And we are often at a loss of what to say. And I just saw, I don't know who the veteran was, who she was that had a video, but she gave me something that I use a lot, that when people thank me for my service, I say, well, you were worth it. And I think when we come to Veterans Day, that's kind of the feeling that we have as veterans, is we appreciate the recognition for our sacrifice and the sacrifice of our families and allowing us to serve. At the same time, there's a sense that it was a privilege to serve our nation, and that our nation was definitely worth our sacrifice. Every veteran gives the American people a blank check, and we have no idea what's going to be written on that check by the time our period of service is up. And so what Veterans Day does is it provides a way for the nation just to say thank you to those who have served. And that population is decreasing as the years go by. This current conflict, the global war on terror, less than 1% of the United States population actually served in the global war on terror. And that war is from October of 2001 to September of 2021. And I would probably argue that war is still going on. But as that population goes down, it's more and more important, I think, for us to just express our appreciation to the veterans who helped protect our freedom.
I would never compare being a nurse to being a veteran, but I can relate in the fact that all of that public adulation, sometimes, we felt that as a nurse, I felt the public saying thank you during COVID or things like that. And it really is at odds with the servant nature of the profession. And that's what I'm hearing you say for veterans. So, and really, before I forget, I want to say I was looking up some statistics on the global war on terror, Tim. And there are 1.3 million veterans as of November of last year that have served in the global war on terror. And even though that's a small portion of the population, that is a lot of veterans and their families. And so thinking about the opportunity for us to model as families, for us to say thank you intentionally to veterans and their families, what are good ways to do that so that we don't make them feel bashful and awkward? And, what are ways that veterans appreciate expressions of thanks?
One thing that we did as parents, my wife and I, when our kids saw a veteran with a ball cap on that, had their branch of service or whatever conflict that they were in, what war they were in, we would have our kids go up and just shake that person's hand and say, thank you for serving. And that simple gesture for many of those men and women, it was a powerful impact upon them. And it also helped our kids learn that their freedom's not free, that it's bought with the price of people who've actually given their lives, but also people who are still living, and sometimes who are dealing with secret battles and battles that we can see. And so I think it's important for our kids that when we encounter people in our daily lives that it's obvious that they're a veteran, just encouraging our kids to just simply go up to that person and thank them for their service.
There are so many good things about that. I mean, that's just good on a social level for our kids. And like you said, to help them to lift their eyes, to recognize that their freedom is not free. And one of the things that I really love about that, Tim, is that when you go out in public these days, so many people have their face glued to their phone. whether they're, in our generation, whether they're young people. I mean, you can't sit for an oil change or, just wait for food that you maybe ordered to be delivered at the counter. If we have to wait more than 30 seconds, pretty much everybody knows the social contract is you just get out your phone and you start scrolling through it. And I think about how many opportunities that we miss. And I'm really trying to be better about this, about looking around at the people who are there. I mean, for one thing, that's just a safety perspective. But for another thing, how are you going to see that veteran standing there in their hat if you're just absorbed in your world and looking down at your phone? So I think that's such a great encouragement for us to think about this on Veterans Day, and especially on Veterans Day. Be cognizant of your surroundings, whether you're in the grocery store or wherever you're going, or if you're in church, or even thinking about your family members, to look them in the eye, shake their hand, say thank you for their service. And Tim, I'm sure you are like those veterans I was talking about who want to acknowledge their family. What has your wife's support meant to you as a veteran?
So my wife, really, she deserves the most recognition. When we deployed, initially we had very little notice. She had my 6-month-old twin sons at seminary, and we just had not much notice before I left. And I literally left and, for all practical purposes, was gone for about a year, leaving her there at seminary with those 6-month-old babies. And so I tell everybody, the deployment for me was easy. She had the hard job. And so I think our spouses are the ones who deserve the most thanks and adulation for that, because they're the ones who really support us. If it wasn't for them, we couldn't do our jobs. And sometimes I would have the opportunity to talk to her when I was deployed. And when she asked me how I was doing, I was great. It didn't matter if I wasn't great, because what she was doing was a whole lot harder than me. So our family members and the family members of, whether it be a spouse or a mom or dad, they're the ones who really kind of hold the anchor for that veteran that's deployed. And I don't know of a single veteran who would not say contrary to that. We always say our families are the heroes.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. And your kids too. When we think about kids, like I was saying, kids who are in military connected families, they also are really serving alongside that. What is it meant to have your kids? In what ways have your kids contributed to your military service?
Yeah, so my kids weren't really, I was out of the military by the time that they were old enough to remember anything. And so they don't remember that service at all. But I can speak from a dependence perspective with my dad, having a father who served on active duty when he was in Thailand shortly after I was born for a year. He'd been in Vietnam 65 to 66. Then he's in Thailand like 71 to 72. You had some of that time that he was away, and mom had to be mom and dad at the same time. But when he came back, and my father, he never brought the military back. He always was dad when he walked through the doorway, and that was significant. But having the privilege of moving all over the world, you can't replace that experience. And so life for a military dependent, or whatever branch of service it might be, it's a really great life.
Oh, I want to hear more about that. When we come back, we'll talk about how military service has evolved over the generations and what it's like for young people today going into the military service and how that intersects with your faith. Don't go away. We'll be right back with more from Tim McKnight.
This is the Lost in Translation Ministry Minute. Here now is your host, Dr. Baruch Korman.
We can be assured that God is going to move forward in His path, His purposes, His will. It's going to come about. He will come on us like rain, and rain biblically is synonymous with a blessing, and the latter and former rains to the earth. It's interesting, but the latter and former rains are those rains that soften up the soil, and those things that also at the end, the crops need that last bit of moisture in order to thrive and produce their abundance at the end, the greatest yield. And God's promising here that He'll provide everything so there'll be a blessing.
Learn more about the teaching ministry of Dr. Baruch Korman at loveisrael.org. You'll find videos on almost any biblical topic on his YouTube page and on the My Bible Study app. That's loveisrael.org.
The words you are about to hear are taken from letters sent in by members of the Trinity Debt Management Program.
Dear Trinity, today I'm making my final credit card payment.
Before I came to you, I was in a constant state of anxiety and panic, but now there is hope for my family's financial future.
Working with Trinity made me understand that I'm not alone.
You really do help people.
Your kindness will never be forgotten.
Without Trinity's support, I would not have achieved my lifelong goal of becoming debt-free.
We saved a lot on interest and penalties, of course, but the reward was the gift of human kindness.
Trinity has carried me through a very difficult time in my life. You're amazing.
I used to feel so anxious and hopeless. Now I feel grace and peace.
God bless Trinity as you continue to help others become debt-free.
If credit card debt has you down, call Trinity at 1-800-788-1813. That's 1-800-788-1813.
Wow, your garden looks great.
Why, thanks. Uh-oh. I see a weed over here. Let me at it.
What's the big deal? It's just one little weed.
Serious gardeners want to catch weeds early because they spread fast. People who are serious about growing in holiness know something important too. Sin is like a weed. It takes root and spreads. James 1:21 says, "Put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness." If you look at the original language, the idea here is to kill or to put to death all filthiness. Like a gardener attacking a weed, we need to remove sin by the roots and then stay away from any situation likely to lead us into temptation. Are you tolerating any weeds in your garden? Remember, holiness and sin can't exist side by side. If the weeds of impurity are growing unchecked, they will choke out holiness. With Seeking Him, I'm Nancy DeMoss Wagamuth.
Who holds the orphan, comforts the widow, cries for injustice, feels every sorrow, carries the pain of his children. Jesus does. So we sing praise to the Father who gave us the Son. Praise to the Spirit who's living in us. When I was a sinner, He saved me from who I was. 'Cause that's what Jesus does.
Welcome back, friends. That is Jesus Does by We the Kingdom. And He does care for all of those people, including military veterans. We have Veterans Day coming up on November 11th, and I wanted to talk about it before it comes up because I think it's so important for us today to be intentional in leading our families through these times that we are living in and being intentional about serving others, about thanking people for serving our country. So often when we come to these holidays, we may see it as, oh, that's the day the bank is closed, or oh, that's the day that kids don't have school. But we really, as a country and as a nation, need to thank and think about the reason behind those days. And Veterans Day is a time to thank those who have had service, military service to our country. We're talking to Tim McKnight. He is a pastor, a professor, an Army chaplain, and a veteran. And so, Tim, thank you again for your service. Thank you for being here with us today. And before the break, you were sharing about your dad, and you grew up as a kid of a veteran. Your dad was a combat veteran, and you explained to us what that was. And you said something that kind of surprised me. You said it was a really great life. And I think so often when we think about kids and families who are serving in the military, we do just like I did at the beginning of this program. We focus on the challenges, but there are a lot of great things and strengths that are associated with that. So what did you see as the great things growing up in a military family?
So it was hard to be away from extended family. My parents are both from Eastern Kentucky, and so all of our extended family was there. So that was difficult, not being as close to your uncles and your grandparents as you would like to be. But when we're overseas, we see cultures and places that people will never see in their lifetime. And I was blessed to have a mom who didn't just keep us on military post housing when we lived in Okinawa, Japan, or when we lived in West Berlin, Germany in the 80s. And we would go out into the economy and into the culture in Okinawa and in West Berlin and get to know the people and the culture. And that was really a great time. Sometimes we had opportunity to travel within Europe, even though Berlin was a little restricted because we were there 81 to 86. But just being able to see different cultures and see the world was a great opportunity, especially with your family, because veteran families are very close-knit. When you're overseas, those families overseas, you're going to school together, Department of Defense schools, and it's a very close-knit community. And your immediate family, your nuclear family, becomes very close as well. So it just was a great time to experience growing up in that environment. Military posts in general are pretty safe places to live too, so that doesn't hurt. So I wouldn't trade my childhood and my time growing up in a military family with a dad who was a veteran for anything. And the cool part now is that now on Veterans Day, like Monday, I'll call my dad and we'll say Happy Veterans Day to each other. So so that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool. And it's really amazing to think about hearing you talk about being in Berlin. I remember when the Berlin Wall fell. I was babysitting actually, and TVs at the time, Tim, I'm sure you remember, they had like 3 channels and you had rabbit ears with foil. And I remember thinking, this is really historic, and trying to adjust the little rabbit ears to watch this little grainy picture on that little screen in front of me, but knowing that military service people and their families are right there on the front lines, ensuring peaceful transitions of power and doing all kinds of things that I don't even know how to describe, but impacts my life every single day because of the safety that I live under. And when I look back at generations, we see waning American attitude towards veterans. Of course, World War II veterans, the greatest generation. Then we had the Korean War, and then, the public sentiment changed during Vietnam, and those veterans have such a different experience having experiencing the public perception of their service than World War II. And then we had Desert Shield and Desert Storm. And then we had this rise of millennials who enlisted after 9/11. And then, we're the global war on terror or peacetime service. What do you see as the changing attitudes, and how does that impact veterans when we see this kind of cultural shift that happens?
Sure. I think every veteran sacrifices something, and whether it's combat deployment, non-combat deployment, there's something that's sacrificed, whether it's time with family, and every veteran comes back different depending upon the nature of deployment. I know with ours being a force protection and having a real threat, I came back, I didn't laugh as much, didn't smile as much. My father being a Vietnam vet, a combat veteran, he has memories that I'm sure he would like to forget and experiences that he doesn't want to remember. And so just the general public, letting them know that they see a veteran and there are numerous stories behind the face that they see that they'll never hear. The veterans talk to each other about those things. It doesn't matter if you're a World War II vet or a global war on terrorism vet. Veterans have a bond regardless of which war they were in or which conflict they were in. And so we're able to talk to each other, but the general public, when they talk to us, and it's nothing against the general public, I think they just don't know what to say many times. And so I think just listening, and if they ask questions, veterans will usually answer their questions. We need to be wise about the questions we ask. The question, have you ever killed anyone, is probably not a smart question to ask a veteran. But asking a general question like, hey, what was your time like in the service? That's an open-ended question that a veteran would be very comfortable answering. But I see with the general public still a respect for veterans. I mean, I can just tell you a story. My wife and I had the kids. I've got 4 kids, and they were young at the time, and we were in Gatlinburg at a breakfast spot, and I just had a jacket on, said U.S. Army, and my hat on. And by the way, I'm not currently serving as a chaplain. I got out in 03, but I had my jacket on and I had my hat on. And so I guess people could see that I was an Army veteran. And it came time to pay my bill, and the waitress said, that's already taken care of. And that still happens today. Vietnam vets did not get that. They're getting that more now than they ever did, and I think they appreciate that. But I don't think the American public has changed in that. I think that how we actually approach veterans politically has changed.
And we see that the share of the U.S. population with military experience is going down. And I'm reading some statistics here. In 1980, about 18% of U.S. adults were veterans, but that fell to 6%, just a third in 2022. And what do you see? You work in youth ministry now, Tim. What do you see as the current attitude of young people about serving their country in the military service? And what would you say to those young people who are listening and who are considering serving their country through the military?
I think there's been just candidly, I think there's been a lot of uncertainty in the last few years about where the military is going. And so youth in the last few years have been uncertain about whether they wanted to serve. And yet in the midst of that, we still have students who want to serve their country and they want to serve their communities, whether they're in the National Guard in that capacity. So I think there's still that desire, but there's been a hesitancy because they're not sure how they're going to be used if they go into the service. And that's something that, if I was candid with you, that veterans share. As a veteran, I don't think there's been a time since World War II where we haven't had some sort of political effect upon a conflict. And so maybe Korea wasn't as politically impacted, but Vietnam, definitely there were politics involved that prevented service members from doing their job. And even in the Desert Storm, Afghanistan, Iraq, whether it dealt with rules of engagement or what we could do, not saying unethical things, but just being able to chase the enemy into places that the enemy went and being barred from going there. One thing I would say is I think young people see that and they don't want to be used in a way that is unfair or unjust, that we kind of tie their hands. If they go in the military, we don't want to tie their hands so they can't win the war that we're sending them to fight.
That sounds extremely difficult, Tim. And I think that it's interesting to see the narrative of kids today talking about this because they have a different medium to talk about it on social media. And, when we were growing up, the world seemed so far away, just like I described it, looking at Berlin on a grainy television. It was very abstract to me. And now kids are seeing things that are happening in the world, conflict, war, acts of terror. Not only do they see it quickly, they see it live sometimes, just live streaming. They can open up their phone and see things that are happening. And I think you and I have talked about this before, but it contributes to kids feeling like the world is unsafe. We have to remember that millennials are the first generation born post 9/11. They don't remember what it was like to not have a TSA checkpoint, to just walk into an airport or all of those other ways that the world changed after 9/11. And we see that continuing. And so how do you, when you're talking with youth today who do have that uncertainty, that anxiousness about the future, when we see even now, global conflict and kids really taking a stake in that and trying to develop their opinions about that, how do you speak to them from a faith-informed perspective to encourage them that they're safe in some ways, even when their world is not safe? How do we find assurance?
Sure. Can you still hear me, Jessica?
Yeah, I can still hear you, Tim. Okay. Yeah, we can still hear him. Hang on, guys. We're just trying to get Tim. Just 1 second. We're having a technical difficulty here. I can hear him and he cannot hear me. But I do think, while we're trying to get him back, I do think this is a conversation that we have had before, that this is, and actually this is a conversation we had earlier in the week with Adam Rasmussen, a professor from Arizona Christian University who works with Dr. George Barna, and released some information talking about how worldview can contribute to anxiety and mental health challenges and feelings of depression, because when kids feel like the world is out of control and anything can happen, we have to think about it. These are kids that are not living in the shadow of World War II, where the war seemed very defined. The role at home was defined. This seems like this can erupt anywhere at any time. There can be violent protest at any time. There can be conflict on college campuses. We've seen that erupt. We've seen kids who aren't getting opinions just from Encyclopedia Britannica or National Geographic magazines about things that are happening in the world, but they are seeing things happen in real time. And they also have relationships with people who are around the world. They can do that through social media, and that changes their perception of the way that they think about global conflict, the way that they think about events that are going on in the world. And, you know, there's some good things about that, and there's some challenging things about that. And we want to control that. Some of us want to go back, because there's some ways in which I believe that kids were designed to live in small communities and to know the people that they were interacting with. And now we have kids who can meet people all over the world, which can be great, but can also be really scary. And so it's important to know, though, that parents and families who have good relationships with their kids, they are by far the most influential worldview, and they are the most influential on developing a kid's worldview. Even though we think, oh, it's their kids or it's social media or it's anything like that, it's not. It's actually our families. It's the parents. It's the kids. We need to be having these kinds of conversations at home. And I think thinking about being intentional and how we're going to respond, how we're going to serve. And so it would be a great time to sit down with your family and say, what are we going to do for Veterans Day? How are we going to talk about this, about people who are in the military? How can we serve those people who are in our communities, in our sports groups, in our church groups? That's really important. And it's always a good time to convey the message that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And since the beginning of time, the first humans were on earth, we've had conflict, we've had wars, we've had uncertainty. There have been times of peace and times of great tribulation and trial. But to be able to go back to say, God is on his throne, God is sovereign, that is really important. And I think we have Tim back. So Tim, I'm going to let you finish your thought there before we go to break. And I really want to lean into this faith angle in the next segment and talk about your role as a chaplain. So I'll let you finish your thought and what you were saying.
Sure. I think that I'd emphasize for those students that the same God who's sovereign over natural occurrences is the God who's sovereign over war. Psalm 46 talks about God is our refuge and strength, ever-present help in times of trouble. Even though the mountains get thrown into the sea, he's God. And then later on it says, though nations strive against each other, he's God. And in verse 10 it says, be still and know I'm God. So one thing that I really emphasize for young people is that type of peace was available for me when I was deployed in the military. And every service member who is a Christ follower has that potential of having that peace in their life. And any young person who's over here, whether it be going through school and exams or whatever, they can be still and know he's God.
That is such a good word of advice. And when we come back, we'll talk about those challenges that military veterans face, because they do have challenges in mental health and overall well-being, and we'll give some resources for that. Don't go away. We'll be right back talking about what are you and your family going to do for Veterans Day? What will you do to thank and honor a veteran in your family, in your community, in your life, in the public? Maybe you'll meet a new veteran. I want you to think now about what you're going to do. We'll be right back with Tim McKnight, who is a veteran, a pastor and professor, and we'll continue our conversation. We'll see you right on the other side of this break.
The American Family Association's mission is to inform, equip, and activate individuals to strengthen the moral foundations of our culture. We also support the church. Our goal is to be a leading organization in biblical worldview training for cultural transformation. AFA aims to evangelize the lost and disciple the believer. We aim to strengthen biblical marriages and equip parents to raise godly children.
Thank you for standing with the American Family Association.
When you hear this,
This is American Family News.
You know what follows is the truth. Your news from a Christian perspective.
Hundreds of teachers are going to have to walk into that school building, and they are forced to swallow political ideology that in many cases violates their very faith and conscience.
If you miss it at the top of the hour, American Family News podcasts are available at afn.net. And sign up for our daily news brief at afn.net.
Danny, the baby just rolled over for the first time. Oh, what a strong little boy.
That a boy, son? You're on your way.
Oh, who's my strong little man?
Rollovers can be milestones in life, some early on and some later. One rollover you might consider is from your individual retirement account to a charitable gift annuity with the AFA Foundation. If you'd like to increase your retirement income and leave an impactful gift to the work of American Family Association, the charitable gift annuity is a worthwhile option. To learn more, contact the AFA Foundation at 800-326-4543, extension 345, or email foundation@afa.net. If you own an IRA, would like to increase your charitable giving, but need retirement income, the IRA to CGA rollover may be for you. Call the AFA Foundation at 800-326-4543, extension 345.
So right now may be the perfect time for you to rethink how you pay for health care. And here's why. This time of year is decision time for a lot of people, but it's also when you can join MediShare and save even more than usual. For many families, joining MediShare means saving about $500 a month, which is a game changer for a lot of people, obviously. But what's more, MediShare members like it a lot. Their satisfaction rate is 98%. Imagine that. And MediShare is a proven thing, too, for over 30 years. It's a Christian community of hundreds of thousands of people now. And here's the thing. If you join before November 15th and you mention the promo code SHARE, they'll waive your application fee, so you save even more right off the bat. I'll give you the number here in a second, but just call and you'll get a price within 2 minutes. And again, the deadline is November 15th. So call now. You'll save even more. Here's the number, 833-44-BIBLE. That's 833-44-BIBLE, 833-44-BIBLE.
Things are getting real. Jesus, take the wheel. Only way I'm getting to the other side. Days are getting dark. Life's a little hard. Blinded, but I'm trying not to lose sight. I don't got this, I know you got this, yeah, yeah, yeah. And I believe it before I see it, yeah, yeah, yeah. I know you're gonna see me through it. If anybody can, you can do it. God, I know in the trial and the pain, fire and the rain, you're gonna see me through it. You're gonna see me through it. If anybody can, you can do it. And whenever my heart goes away,
Welcome back, friends. God is going to see you through it. No matter what you're going through today, that is See Me Through It by Brandon Heath. And if you're feeling like, I don't know how I feel about facing whatever challenges are in your day ahead, put that song on after the program's over and just crank it up and let the truth of that wash over you. And we know that no matter what we face, God is going to see us through it, whether that is a war, a global conflict, the aftermath of a presidential election. Today, we are focusing our hearts and minds on Veterans Day that is coming up on November 11th. You heard me share at the beginning that we've been celebrating some form of Veterans Day since 1919, and Veterans Day as we know it has been celebrated on November 11th since 1971. I want to challenge you to think about Veterans Day as more than a day that the bank is closed or you're off from work or school, but as an opportunity for your family to really engage in your community and to do something simple to thank a veteran. We've been talking with Tim McKnight, who is an Army veteran. He also is the author of this book, Engaging Generation Z, Raising the Bar for Youth Ministry. He's been on a couple of times before, and we've had some great conversation about reaching today's youth with the hope of Jesus Christ. And just like today's generation needs that, veterans need that too. So I challenge you to look around when you're in the grocery store, look around when you are waiting on your oil to get changed, and just look for someone who is wearing a veteran's hat. Walk up to them, as Tim suggested, shake their hand, look them in the eyes, say thank you for their service, maybe pay for their meal, and think intentionally about that. If you have a family member or someone in your church, think about sending them a card or do something nice for their family. It's always better to give than to receive. And it's such a great time, especially even as we're heading into the holidays, to model that for our kids, ways that we can serve, uplift, and encourage each other. And Tim, we know from your service as a chaplain, which you have shared a little bit about before, that no one needs that more than veterans who are in very scary situations. You said something earlier that really has got me thinking. You said that when they sign up, and I didn't write it down exactly like you said it, but you said they sign a blank check and give it to the American people or something to that effect. That's accepting a lot of uncertainty, a lot of personal risk. What are the spiritual needs like when you write a check like that?
Yeah, the military is ripe for the gospel. And so one of the things that I saw as a chaplain was seeing people who were in stressful environments and were in potentially uncertain situations. Many times when you are deployed or something, you don't really know, hey, when am I coming back? How long are we going to be gone? Where are we going? And so that creates a lot of uncertainty and the potential for anxiety and stress, not to mention that if they're in a combat area, which we were not, but if a soldier's in the combat area, that's even more stressful because you face that mortality and potential death. And so military service members are ripe for chaplains to come alongside them and share with them the hope of Jesus Christ. And so it was a privilege for me to serve in that capacity and to also, as soldiers were coming back from different things, sometimes we would give them critical incident stress debriefs to try to help them manage through when they've encountered post-traumatic stress so they would not develop post-traumatic stress disorder. And so chaplains kind of serve in a role where they are trying to be the hands and feet of Christ as Protestant chaplains. Of course, we've got chaplains who are Jewish and Muslim who cover all the major religions in the military. But I was a Protestant chaplain, particularly my endorsing agent was the Southern Baptist Convention's Home Missionary Board, which is now the North American Mission Board. And so I served as basically a home missionary in the United States Army, seeking to hold out the gospel to my soldiers.
And what does that look like? What kinds of things do they face? What are the challenges? How do you minister to someone who is serving in such a precarious time? Because again, the way that conflict erupts in the world, it just looks a lot different than it did. It seems so much more open-ended and nuanced. And what is it like? What kinds of challenges do you see veterans facing with their spiritual and mental health?
I think that veterans face sometimes the challenge of multiple deployments now because our manpower is so low that our veterans have deployed several times in conflicts and wars. And so some veterans I know have 3 or 4 deployments, which Vietnam, my father was deployed for, I think, a year, and they came back. World War II, they were deployed pretty much for the duration. And so I would say probably our veterans today are probably similar to World War II veterans in the time that they've been in combat areas or deployments. And so that's a challenge on the family. That's a challenge on the veteran. And so those are unique for the chaplains, and the chaplains are going there too. The chaplains aren't just staying at home, and so they're deployed with those military service members, and their families are going through the same thing. There's a transition when you come back home where I equate it to, people ask me what was it like coming back off the deployment. I said, well, we were doing 24-hour operations. So think about doing a NASCAR race, and then you come back and just pull the speed brake and go to 0 miles per hour. And that's what it's like coming home from a deployment. And then you also have your spouse who's been taking care of everything by herself or himself, depending upon the service member, the whole time the deployments happen. And then we come back and we're wanting to come back into the space we were beforehand as far as how the home functions on an everyday basis. And neither one of us have been living together day to day. And so we've gotten used to other patterns. And so there's some friction there. That's potential. So you face all of those challenges where it's challenges sometimes, too, if a veteran gets out of the military, they've been in a role where they literally can make international influence in the job that they're in the military, but then they get out of the military and now they're in a situation where they're trying to find a job, or the job that they're in doesn't seem like it's as significant. So those are all types of things that veterans face.
And you actually have a resource that you want to share for veterans who may be in crisis. And it's important for not only veterans who are in crisis, but for the general public to be aware, because you never know when you might have a conversation with a veteran or have a family member or a friend who is showing signs of crisis. And this is a resource that they can use. Tim, would you share that with us?
Sure. So if you're a veteran and you're having some hard times processing things, VA has a hotline. You can call 988 and press 1, and you can talk to a crisis line responder, or you can text 838-255, and you can text them. And the VA is there to help, and they have helped numerous veterans to work through what they're experiencing as they've come back off deployments or come out of the military. And so I would encourage you, veterans, we're brothers and sisters in arms, and we're not meant to be, God didn't create us to be on an island. We need each other. And so I encourage you, if you're a veteran and you're having some hardship, reach out to 988 and press 1, or text 838-255.
You know, Tim, 988, of course, is the new mental health crisis line. Anyone can call that number, 988. It's kind of like 911. We all know to call that for any sort of emergency. But we're seeing such an overwhelming number of mental health emergencies. And I talked about this back in Suicide Prevention Month, where we talked about 988, having that in your phone and calling that for any time. But like you said, pushing 1, dialing 988 and then pushing 1 gets you connected to specifically for veterans. So Tim, I've got the statistics actually pulled up right here in front of me for 988. And for the last month, for last month here and this year, there were 647,566 calls into that 988 number. And there were 69,859 calls to the Veteran Crisis Line. 69,859. So, that tells me two things. It tells me, one, it's great that people are getting help and they are actually calling and reaching out for resources and saying, hey, I'm struggling here. I need some help. And two, it tells me that veterans should know that they are not alone. I think, what we have as the perception, Tim, is that veterans are supposed to be strong and they're supposed to soldier on, literally, in the most literal sense. And sometimes it can be hard for them to reach out to help. So how do you, as a chaplain, help and maybe talk to some of those veterans who might be listening, who think, I'm just trying to soldier on. I'm trying to do it on my own. What would you tell them about reaching out for help?
Well, the cool thing about a chaplain is we're probably one of the most popular people in the unit. And so because our mission is to nurture the living, care for the wounded, and to honor the fallen. And so usually a soldier, sailor, airman, a Marine is very close with their chaplain or wants to have their chaplain close by. So the ministry of presence is huge. And so I really usually get veterans that reach out to me when they find out I'm a chaplain. The conversation will change and they'll talk to me about things that maybe they wouldn't talk to other folks about. And so if you know chaplains and if you've been a chaplain, then you are a precious commodity among the veteran community because veterans really want to reach out to you. I know there are chaplains that are associated with the American Legion, the Veterans of Foreign Wars, Military Officer Association. So chaplains serve a great role, not just when they're serving, but when they get out of support. But you can serve in that way as a brother or sister in arms who is a Christ follower, just holding out the hope of Christ, giving a listening ear, and being present. And I think those are some ways that we can help that community.
Absolutely. And what would you say to other people who may see veterans who are experiencing some of the trauma that they have experienced? What are ways that people can be sensitive to that and understanding and supportive of that?
I think helping veterans overcome any stigma of what they're struggling with and also a stigma of seeking help that many times, like you're saying, a veteran wants to kind of just soldier on, and we didn't really do that in the military. We had each other, but it's ironic that when we get out that we want to isolate ourselves. And so I think not allowing, if you have a loved one who's a veteran, not nagging them, but not allowing them to isolate themselves and really trying to point them to another veteran community. Don't be offended if they can't talk to you, because sometimes they don't want to share things that are hard for them to share, and they think they're going to be hard for you to hear, and they don't want to burden you with those things. So don't be offended if they don't share. But you can point them to a veteran community or even to the VA, and the VA can help, or that veteran community can help in having a listening ear that may be able to relate better to what they've experienced.
I think that's a really good piece of advice, because sometimes, you as family members, you can think, why can't you share this with me? Why can't you tell me how you're feeling? Why can't you tell me what you experienced? And maybe they can't because of national security reasons, because of the, just the demands of the duty to keep those things secret and private. And sometimes it is really hard because you think they didn't experience that. So encouraging them to reach out, to talk to other veterans, I think is important, because I've heard that a lot from veterans who are saying, that it's really hard for them to talk to civilians or non-veterans or whatever the terms are. I totally apologize, Tim, if I am not using the right words. So please feel free to educate me.
No, you're right on.
Is that true?
Right. Yeah.
The civilians? Okay, so
That's
that is true. So there's just a different kind of community.
And you don't want to put a civilian down, because they support the veterans, but they just don't know how. And you don't want to be like, well, you don't know what it's like, you don't understand. You don't want to say those things, but that's really the reality of it, because when you've got such a low population that has experienced what the veterans experience, whether it be a combat or non-combat veteran, they have all sacrificed something, and that civilian doesn't really understand what that's like. And so having that veteran community, whether it be through the VA or one of the other organizations I mentioned, or through the church. There are veteran communities in the church. I can tell you our university, we have veterans there. And when you get us veterans together, we have different conversations, a lot of laughter, a lot of camaraderie. And we miss that when we're out. And so having that when we're out finding those people is really important. So I think veterans can talk to other veterans in a way that civilians can't. And it's not because the civilian's not important. It's just they haven't had the same experiences.
Well, Tim, I just want to thank you again for your service to our country in so many ways. Thank you for your military service, and thank you for all that you have gone on to do to serve future generations. And I would just like to ask you if you would just pray for the veterans and their families, the veterans who have served, who are serving, those veterans who are yet to be, who are going off to serve and will become veterans. Would you just take a moment to pray for them?
Sure. Father, I thank you for this day and for the peace and joy and love that we have in you. Father, I thank you for the freedom that we have through Jesus Christ, the greatest freedom we can ever celebrate. But Father, I also thank you for the freedom that we have in this country, for people who are willing to serve it. And God, I pray for those who've served, that you would give them your peace, that they may be whole in their lives, that they may, if they don't have a relationship with Jesus Christ, come to know him as Lord and Savior. And Father, that for their families, I pray that you'd watch over them. And for men and women who are contemplating your call into military service, I pray that you give them wisdom and give them the boldness to follow that call. Father, thank you for our nation. Thank you for the time we have Monday. Amen.
Amen, Tim. Hey, may the Lord bless you and keep you and make his face shine on you. I'll see you right here tomorrow.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast may not necessarily reflect those of the American Family Association or